invisible enemy, COVID-19. Today, we are going to have some information from the Department of Transport as we start level 4 of the lockdown. Level 4 is the risk-adjusted approach to easing the lockdown from level 5, which allows certain limited economic activities in our country. You have already been briefed on what economic activities will be undertaken under this level, but still observing all the guidelines that we need to observe to ensure that we don't get infected, even in the factories that will have opened. Without any further ado, I will now call upon the Minister of Transport, Minister Mbalula, to speak to us on what does level 4 says about transport in our country. Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you, Minister Mthembu. The Deputy Minister of Transport, Mr. Fikile Mbalula, and the Director General of Transport, Mr. Alec Moemi, who are going to be with me to help answer questions from the public and the media in general. Happy May Day to all the workers of our country. We have always been mindful that transport is not only an enabler of economic activity and access to social amenities, but also a potent instrument capable of spreading the COVID-19 virus far and wide. After all, it was the aviation sector that enabled the virus to reach our shores. Ours is to ensure that the mobility of the virus through our transport system is stopped dead on its tracks. Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma has published regulations that give effect to the alert level 4 of the risk-adjusted strategy to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, which comes into effect today. As mandated by these regulations, we have made adjustments to our directions in order to ensure alignment with level 4. These adjustments have been informed by consultations we have undertaken with industry bodies and authorities in the taxi, bus, rail, aviation, maritime sectors. Our mandate as a sector is that of a catalyst which enables mobility in economy and social setting. However, we are enjoined to execute this mandate responsibly and in a manner that ensures that the preservation of human life remains sacrosanct. The hard choices we have to make as a nation are premised on the centrality of the right to life and our singular commitment to uphold this right above all else. Not everyone will be happy with these choices, some of which will be hard and will change our way of life. However, we must never forget the reason we make these difficult choices in the first place: to preserve human life. We are equally duty-bound to ensure that ours is not a sector that will enable the rampant spread of the virus. The measures that we put in place and continue to revise from time to time are meant to mitigate against this spread through various transport modes. Today we announce the directions That will enable the shift to level 4 insofar as transport operations are concerned. Maritime. In respect of maritime transport, there will be no changes to the directions regulating the movement of ships. The ban on passenger vessels and cruise liners remains in place, and only vessels bringing in cargo are allowed to call on our ports. However, we will allow the movement of cargo from our seaports to either warehouses or final destinations as provided for in the current regulations. Aviation. The ban on both domestic and international passenger flights remain in place. However, as is already the case, we will continue to allow repatriation flights, either bringing back South Africans stranded in foreign countries or transporting foreign nationals to their home countries. And we execute this task led by the Department of Foreign Affairs in South Africa, which is DERCO, International Relations and Cooperation. The current approval procedures to permit departure or landing of such flights remains unchanged. The easing of the lockdown to level 4 means increasing economic activity in sectors that are permitted to resume operations. Due consideration will be given to mining and agricultural sector to allow limited movement of aircrafts, either to transport essential workers by chartered aircrafts or to spray pesticides on crops. All these movements will be subject to approval and permits will be issued on a case-by-case basis. No scheduled domestic flights will be permitted in level 4. This is determined by the risk-adjusted strategy, which guides the easing of restrictions. Once the alert level moves to level 3, limited movement of scheduled domestic flights will be allowed. It is only when the country's alert level reaches level 2 that will fully open our airspace and allow movement of both domestic and international flights. Rail. With the gradual resumption of economic activity in certain sectors and permitted movement of freight, we will allow the full resumption of freight rail. Commuter rail will resume operations gradually on an incremental basis, based on the detailed plan submitted by the passenger rail operators. Limited services with strict measures to ensure social distancing and other mitigation measures will be introduced. Gautrain operations will be gradually reintroduced in all rail-based services, covering 8 of their 9 stations. There will be no airport service for Gautrain. An appropriate load factor will be applied by all operators based on their seating and standing arrangements, according to 50% standard coach occupancy. Gautrain will mark out areas of the station to demarcate where to stand and queue appropriately based on 1 passenger per square meter. The Gautrain seating arrangement will consist alternate seats to allow regulated spacing and control based on average 1 passenger per square meter. Operating staff in completion of service will operate from 5 o'clock to 12 and 15 hours with an appropriate peak hour service. The last trains will depart at 18 hours to clear the system by 19 hours. to allow for travelling of operating staff and completion of service. The Gautrain will operate from 5 to 12 and 15 to 20 hours with an appropriate peak hour service. Maintenance staff will be permitted to move in and around the system during curfew hours, which is 22-hour PM and 4-hour in the morning. Maintenance vehicles will only be permitted to move around the system in these hours only. PRASA will similarly adopt a gradual reintroduction of its services based on its capacity to manage crowds, implement effective social distancing, and implement other mitigation measures that include cleaning and disinfection of services, trains, and stations. PRASA will undertake the compulsory testing of the rolling stock during the level 4 period and only resume with limited service once the National Coronavirus Command Council declares the risk adjustment to level 3. So there will be no trains on Monday. That must be absolutely clear. I've seen other people making claims that there will be trains and so on. So there will be no trains on Monday. And the Command Council, once it declares level 3, with the return of the Pienaarsport line in Tshwane and the Southern line in Cape Town, will be the first ones which will be considered. There will be no immediate resumption of Metro Rail commuter services until we have satisfied ourselves that the risk of transmission is manageable on a corridor-by-corridor basis. Long-distance trains are still prohibited in level 4. Road-based transport, cross-border road transport, cross-border road passenger movement remains prohibited. Only essential cargo will be allowed to move across our land borders. The definition of essential cargo has been broadened in the level 4 regulations published on 29th April 2020. The SADC protocol on COVID-19 is applicable. It also details the goods that should be allowed by member states to move across land borders. On public transport, with the country moving to level 4 and more people returning to work, we have revised the operating hours for all road-based public transport modes. All road-based public transport services are permitted to operate from 5 until 19 hours, with a grace period of 1 hour in the afternoon to complete their trips and drop off passengers. Because you know that curfew is taking place from 8 o'clock at night to 5 a.m. in the morning. This includes minibus taxis, buses, metered taxis, e-hailing services, charter and shuttle services. No public transport is allowed on the road between 20 hours, 8 o'clock in the evening, and 5 a.m. in the morning. Sanitization principles currently applicable to public transport vehicle and facilities remain. Meaning sanitization principles and a mask are mandatory. It's compulsory. You don't enter a taxi or a bus without a mask or being sanitized. Government will support sanitization of public transport and will also support with masks. But public in general is expected, it has been made easy that you can produce your own mask. When you approach public areas, you travel, you interact with whoever, you are in a public taxi, you are in a bus, you are in a train, you must have a mask. It's compulsory. When you leave your house, you must have a mask on your face whenever you go in public areas. Where applicable, public transport masks will be provided, and you'll be sanitized as and when you get into the taxi or a bus. No person is allowed to use public transport who is not wearing a face mask. It is now a law. Ngumthetho, kimulao. We call on the public to ensure strict adherence to this requirement by obtaining their own face masks in line with the guidance given by Minister Zuma. While government may provide limited assistance in ensuring availability of masks, the onus rests on each individual to ensure that they do not leave home without a mask. I've emphasized this particular point. Minibus taxis. Loading capacity for minibus taxis remain at 70% of licensed passengers, with social distancing and other mitigating measures remaining in place. We know for a fact that there are those who've been cutting corners and undermining this principle. But we equally know that the majority of service providers, operators, minibus taxis have been quite obedient and law-abiding and sticking to the 70%. With increased hours, 70% remain in place. And we still call upon to everyone to stick to this. And I wish to emphasize this point. If anyone charges you rural areas, Zingi, or wherever my people there have reported to me that in Zingi, some taxi drivers are taking chances and they are cashing on and asking them for extra fees to cover for the 30%, that it's illegal. It's not lawful. It is not lawful for anyone to charge you extra fees if the taxi is 70%. 70% is compulsory. And report anybody to law enforcement, and law enforcement will be on top of those people who undermine the law. E-hailing and meter taxis. Loading capacity for meter taxis and e-hailing services remain at 50%. A 5-seater vehicle is permitted to carry a maximum of 2 passengers and a driver. A 5-seater vehicle is permitted to carry a maximum of 2 passengers and a driver. Buses. Buses will be allowed to transport 70% passengers of their licensed loading capacity with requisite social distancing, wearing of masks by all passengers, and other mitigating measures. It means the driver of a bus must have sanitizer so that everybody who gets inside the bus, you are sanitized as it is. And that's what must happen. And government will support the industry with sanitizers as we are doing now. I've received calls and will be monitoring the situation that in some instances, in most instances, these regulations and this call of sanitizing masks is not adhered to. Now it is law. It is in the regulations that you must put on a mask, and then you must also ensure that you are sanitized when you get into a taxi. It is the law. Now we have added shuttle and chauffeur services, which you will know that in the regulations that have just come to pass at level 5, shuttle services and chauffeur were not allowed. Now we have now added them in terms of the new regulations. Shuttle and chauffeur services will be subject to the same rules as other road-based public transport modes. Both the shuttle and chauffeur services will only be permitted for transportation of people undertaking essential work and those economic sectors allowed to return back to work under level 4. You will get a mining company having a shuttle service for its own employees. That is the only thing that is allowed. Service will be provided by those companies, like for instance, hiring companies and so on, like Aviation and so on. Shuttle service will only be allowed for that. Loading capacity of 50% is equally applicable to this services. Charter services. Charter services will be subject to the same rules as other road-based public transport modes. This service is only permitted for transportation of people undertaking essential work. Loading capacity of 50% is equally applicable to these services. A number of companies, particularly in the mining sector, work 3 shifts, resulting in employees finishing work outside the permitted public transport operating hours. These companies may make use of charter services. This question has been asked. Now that mining companies have been allowed to go back, even in level 5 towards the end, what happens to them? We have answered this question, that they can make use of charter services for their employees. Operators of vehicles undertaking this service must be identifiable as such for purposes of law enforcement. Delivery services such as Uber Eats, Mr. Delivery, and any other similar services are permitted to operate between 9 o'clock and 19 hours, only for delivery of food, not alcohol or cigarette. Those things are banned, just food, okay? Courier services. Courier services are permitted to operate in the delivery of any goods permitted for sale in the level 4 regulations. It should, however, be noted that the wholesale sector has been allowed to return back to service, and amongst the sub-sectors allowed to trade is the e-commerce. That includes online shopping for items such as personal ICT, equipment, and other goods. This sector is reliant on the courier services to deliver its goods to customers at their homes. Travel between provinces, metros, and districts. Travel between provinces, metropolitan areas, and districts is prohibited. Travel between provinces, metropolitan areas, and districts is prohibited, with concession made for workers who have to commute to and from work on a daily basis. Attendance of funerals and transportation of mortal remains. The Minister of Cocta has published regulations allowing a once-off special dispensation for persons who were not at their places of residence before the lockdown period and who could not travel between provinces, metropolitan and district areas during the lockdown to return to their homes. You know that now that it is allowed once off, and those people are now permitted to travel between today, 1st of May 2020 and 7 May 2020 in line with COCTA regulations. You are allowed today, including those who ran away to Zingi in Limpopo, to come back between now, the 1st, and then to stay and not to leave. Like I said, the movement is not allowed between districts, metropolitan, and provinces. It's not allowed. You are allowed from today till the 7th of May to rearrange your setup, not to visit friends and all of that. To rearrange your setup, you are a student or you are a doctor or whatever that you are, when the lockdown was announced, you were caught up somewhere and you've been so much disciplined and adhering to the law, you did not even attempt to travel at night, 12 o'clock. You have stayed true to the regulations. You are now allowed, as a law-abiding citizen, to then go back to where you belong, to go back to work, whatever that you are doing. Long-distance bus and taxi operators are allowed to undertake long-distance travel during this window period. People have been asking, I'm staying in Cape Town, there's no airplane, and all of that, there is a bus, Greyhound, Translux, will take you back to Johannesburg. And taxis as well. During this period, long distance will be allowed. After that, 7th of May, shut down. No longer traveling, long distance, and all of that. And remember, this is not traveling for visit. It's to rearrange your life. Because your life has been so interrupted by the lockdown. You are separated from your kids, from your family, husbands from wives, wives from husbands. So you are allowed. You were caught up, stranded somewhere because of the lockdown. I love abangena maputin, emoto, and all of that. We're not talking about those. We're talking about people who are seriously separated from their loved ones or whatever that is the case because of work, and you got caught up. Now, in this period, you are allowed to go back home and observe the regulations. And for that, buses and taxi operators are allowed to undertake long-distance travel during this window period. Full compliance with the 70% passenger capacity, wearing of masks, all passengers, and sanitization of vehicles at the completion of each journey is mandatory requirement. Still, in this long distance, is not to now get 100% people in the bus or a taxi. 70% still applies to this. Driving schools will be permitted to resume their activities subject to effective social distancing and sanitizing measures. Both the instructor and the learner must wear face masks at all times. Servicing of vehicles of personnel performing emergency services is permitted under level 4. This also includes the importation of spares for service purposes and for manufacturing. Emergency spares are also allowed to be on sale. There are taxi people who have been doing work and transporting our essential workers and all of that. And then they've been saying that we are unable to service our cars, our tires, and all of that, and so on are worn out. What do we do about it? So now you've got service spares emergency open for you to perform that particular duty. Repairs and fitments to vehicles utilized for emergency and essential services is permitted. Emergency services and roadside assistance. The emergency services and roadside services for all is now allowed. This also includes towing services and support with breakdown of vehicles. Driver's license testing centers, a big issue that everybody is interested in. Now pay attention. Driver's license testing centers and vehicle testing centers will gradually reopen for essential service workers to renew their driver's licenses, drivers and vehicle licenses. The opening of the driver's license testing centers will be staggered once inspection and verification of the state of readiness is done on all of them. The metro-based DLTCs will be opened from the 1st of June at 2020. I know there are many, Minister Mthembu, questions that are going to arise from this and which we should be ready to answer today. We will issue directions to limit the daily numbers of people that can attend to while restricting bookings to online platforms. Going forward, we are committed to redesign business models, make greater use of artificial intelligence, digital channels, telecommunication, redesign transport and logistic norms and practices, sanitizing, social distancing, and introduce new social norms and practices on masks, gloves, PPEs, transparent screens, as well as human contact. And that is no handshakes, no hugging, no pecking and kissing, and ensure minimal contact. These practices and measures will define the new normal and a new way of doing things for generations to come. All these directions we have announced come into effect immediately. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister, for quite a very elaborative explanation of what will happen at this level 4 lockdown in the transport sector. Most appreciated, Minister. When the Minister speaks of this mask, he means it. It's now law. All of us must have a mask. We must cover our faces, we must cover our mouths, we must cover our noses. Now, when the Minister speaks of masks, that includes any cloth that can be used over your mouth and over your nose, as it is reflected in the regulations, so that you don't come back to us and ask us, can I use a cloth? Can I use a scarf? Yes, as long as you have covered your mouth and you have covered your nose. That is the essence, so that you don't get droplets from anybody who's speaking, and you don't infect anybody with COVID-19 through your own droplets, because you have not covered your mouth and you have not covered your nose. Thank you very much, Minister. We had not planned for COVID-19 as a country. Where we might run, and this is what we always say, where we might run short, we are together here. We are together to make the best that we can under these very, very trying and testing circumstances. We are together. Government is not alone. The Transport Ministry, they are not alone in the department, but we are together. This is government and all the people of South Africa working together to defeat this monster called COVID. Having said that, we will now open for questions from the colleagues in the media who have always been a dependable ally in the fight against this pandemic. We will now take questions. We will start with the online service. Do we have a question?
On the line, we have Patrick from Fleetport Magazine. Patrick?
Go ahead, Patrick. We are listening.
Patrick, go on, please.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, Patrick here we have Inter-provincial Magazine. One of the biggest problems on the long-haul delivery route has been the absence of food on the road, and truck drivers have gone without food for 2 days, 3 days. The new regulations say that you can get food, but only as takeaway. Have you given thought to this? Because it has been a huge problem with long-haul truck drivers not being able to eat on the road. Someone who goes 2 days without food, and now there's only deliveries. How are you going to rectify that with perhaps truck stops? Is there any allowance for truck stops to serve food to the truck drivers? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And colleagues who are working on the sound system, if we can just up the volume so that we're able to, but we have heard the question from Patrick. Now our WhatsApp service, we are so organized. We also have a WhatsApp service for the media minister and deputy minister and DG.
Thank you, Minister. The first question is from John Fraser from ZA Confidential. And the question is, can people move into their rented homes? Basically asking whether moving companies can start operating. Is it not working?
People at home are listening to this broadcast.
The second question
Can
is...
you repeat that first, Nonga?
The first question is asking whether moving companies can start operating. Removal companies for people who need to move houses, either in between provinces or in between districts or within a province or within a district.
The next one.
The next question is from Jana Marks from Netwerk 24. The question is, please elaborate on the social distancing measures with regards to queuing to get onto a Gautrain or any other public transport. How exactly will this be observed? The next question is from Charlotte Kilburn from EWN. The question is, what is the process by which the mining and agricultural sector will apply to allow for airborne crop spraying or charter flights to move stuff?
I didn't get that.
What is the process by which the mining and agricultural sector will apply to allow for airborne crop spraying or charter flights to move their resources? The next question is from Khomotso Modise from EWN. The question is, how much has your department spent so far on the provision of masks to taxis?
How many questions do we have you spoken to now?
That was 4. There's one last one.
Last year.
The last question is from Paul Vicchiato from Bloomberg. And the question is, when will the export of wine and wool begin? And through which ports will that be?
Okay. I thought that the Minister of Agriculture was here, and that the issue of export of wine was properly clarified, that it is now possible to export wine on the 4th level of the lockdown. I don't want to get the minister into areas that he was not here when they were explained. But definitely wine can now be exported and all other essential services. But be that as it may, Minister, we are now in your capable hands.
1, 2. I will ask DG to deal first with the technical operational issues, and then we can take other.
DG, as you speak, there are other people who, when we speak, they can see what we say by looking at our lips. So if you can, yes, you are allowed just for the purpose of communication.
He doesn't want to listen. Good opportunity. COVID-19 to be
No, thank you, Minister Mthembu. To the question raised by Patrick on the issue of food stops and truck stops and whether truck drivers can get food on the road, this matter has been ventilated a lot of time, and we have considered duly the challenges that are there. Truck stops have not been prohibited from opening. What has been stopped at the truck stops is the accommodation and sleepover there. However, like any other fuel station and like any other operating business that sells fuel, they are allowed to come in. Garages across the country are operating, and garages do sell some form of food, including pies and other things. What you may not necessarily found is what people normally eat, the truck drivers. I guess it's a question of preference of diet, what you are able to eat. A sandwich vis-a-vis pub and steak, and I think what is preferred is now not found, and I guess that's why it's making a bit of discomfort in this regard. But however, there's no direction that has said that the truck stops has got to close. We Transport certainly have not issued any prohibition to the operation of truck stops. What has been prohibited is the accommodation aspect. At truck stops, they sell rooms where drivers normally rest and sleep overnight. And I think that is the issue.
Well, whilst we are on that, can we clarify whether the people who are listening at home can hear the DG? so that if they can't hear the DG, we had rather ask the DG to come here. They can hear. If everybody can hear, why can't the other stations hear?
I can speak harder.
Is that better?
Is that fine? Oh,
Can't get feeding. Oh, come here, DG. Why is you sorting yourself? Because now I'm confused. Be that as it may, come here, DG.
okay, thank you. I had indicated earlier that the truck stops have not been prohibited from operation. What is prohibited is the issue of the rooms and whether accommodation can be sold attached to the business of the truck stops. But certainly they can operate, they can sell fuel for trucks. We have heard that while other shops do sell food that people can eat either by simply warming in a microwave or otherwise, the challenge has been that in small towns where these trucks deliver food and deliver cargo and other things, in a small town like Venter's Dorp, a truck struggles to park in front of a spa, and for the truck driver to find parking and actually go buy this type of food, and that's why truck stops have been convenient. So we have not issued any direction stopping the truck stops from operation, and I think that that is the message about the truck stops. Secondly, on the issue of whether people can move houses and can do all of that, this certainly is not in the regulations, and this is not provided for. Even in the current window period of 1 until 7 May, such has not been provided for and allocated for this to occur. Because certainly the truck removal companies and the removal sector has not been included into the sectors that get back to work in level 4. We guess when we get to level 3, things gets easier, and road-based services as well become the key provision that can be considered. But at this point, certainly this has not been placed into the regulations. The question around what is the process that has to be followed by farmers and mining companies and everybody who require to operate flights, we have already processed in excess of 2,000 of such requests, which tells us that the industry and sector know exactly what they need to do. And in fact, almost all of them, if you own an aeroplane in South Africa, you certainly know the processes of acquiring a permit. We have a licensing and permit office, and we work closely with the South African Civil Aviation Authority and the Air Traffic Navigation and Traffic Services. And for that purpose, we are quite clear about the process. The process is that you submit your request on a prescribed form for a license permit, and you give us the details of your aircraft and the purpose for which it intends to do. You have to fill in all other requirements, including the licenses and that you're in good standing. The pilot, we look at the hours, all of the. So it's a whole process that the sector knows exactly what they need to do. But once the application comes to us, that application is processed based on whether the regulations allow. Now in level 4, crop spraying is allowed. Now we have already, as I've indicated, processed in excess of 2,000 of this. And if you also consider mining companies, many of them, we have already granted them permission to fly. And they are flying chartered aircraft. We have set regulations for them. We have received further requests from some of them, and we are considering those. Each and every one of the cases is considered on its own merits and whether it makes sense. But there will be certainly no scheduled flights. All flights are chartered and are operated based on the requirements and whether the sector is in for work or not. And obviously, some regular technical flights and all of that we do allow to come in and go. The other issue is about which ports. All our 8 ports are operational, but all of them, as you know, the published and gazetted cargo manifesto of what they handle on a day-to-day basis has been clarified, and it is there for everybody to know. What is important is that now with this we have returned to level 1 of our ports. in terms of cargo on the SPS code. But importantly as well is that we still remain at a heightened level 2 for cargo, and particularly for ships that come from high-risk areas. And this, we are not really concerned about cargo, but concerned about the crew of that ship, and when they come to offload, they do get to interact with our stevedores and with our dockyard workers and all of that. And that's where the SPS level code remains at 2. But certainly all our 8 ports are operational, including in level 4 now. Mossel Bay and Saldanha are back into full stream in terms of what they need to do with the SPS level having been lowered to 1. In as far as the issue of how much, Minister, we have spent for masks for taxis, I think it's early days. We have not yet quantified this, certainly, but what we had set ourselves to achieve was to distribute 3.6 million masks in the first month, considering our projections of 15% capacity of what was essential workers. Now with level 4, we have recalculated this. We need to ramp up this. The figures, we are reworking them on the understanding that we now have got to give out face cloth masks and no longer disposable surgical masks and the N95 respirator masks. So with that, we have reworked our figures certainly, and we project now that we have anything between 30 to 35% of our usual commuter traffic volumes in terms of the commuters that are taking up public transport with effect from today, when the lockdown level has been taken down to level 4. So certainly with that, we are looking at providing in excess of 14 million of the face masks at the prices determined by the Treasury. I believe for a triple layer, it's 25 rand, and for the double layer is 20 rand. So with those prices, I think anybody can make their mathematics about the number of masks. 14 million multiplied by 25 rand, and then it should give you the big picture of how much we are intending to spend in level 4 on that one line item. There's still sanitizers, and I think if we were to try keep track of how much we are spending every day as we place orders and distribute, I have to sit with my people first, Minister, and get to know and get the latest briefing, how far they have gone and where have they exactly distributed, because we have divided this, because it's such a huge thing, we have divided it into 5 separate procurement batches, and the last time I checked, we were on batch number 3. So we are still to go. We still have some way to go to get everything to everyone. So I think I've answered everything except the wines. The wines can be exported by the regulations, and 3 of our major ports are actually exporting the wines. It's Durban, Cape Town, and the port of East London. That's it. Sorry, Ngquga. It's the port of Ngquga. 3 of them.
Minister.
By end of these briefings, will be good on sign language. As you can see, Minister Mthembu is now on top of his game. Thank you very much, Minister Mthembu. I think still that question about expenditure is important. We must answer it, DG, because once you don't answer that question, you are then going to have all sorts of things. So that question we must answer. We must be ready to answer it and keep track and inform South Africans how much we are spending on these masks. And we must also track the procurement. Who are the people who are there? The standards are set by Treasury and all of that. But at our department, we don't want by end of this thing, we must be having issues about questioning of expenditure. And we must follow strict and transparent procurement processes, so that Mam Kize in the streets there also producing masks can have something. out of this. It can't just be the big guys. There is equally an opportunity to make money for our people out of this. The guy was selling, what is this, potatoes, can now be a mask man. Mask, selling. And if he sells to government, that guy in the street or that woman, you can imagine how much they will make. So we must prioritize such people and give them business where it is possible. And I've emphasized this to my team that we need to do that out of this particular process, because it's easy to design a mask and make money. I mean, if a turnover of a person who produce mask, he get a couple of 100,000, it will make a difference, especially at SMME level, because our people can produce this mask. It's a cloth. Now, Dr. Mkhize has given us the designs of how this mask can be done and all of that. Let not only the big guys eat, let even our people in the township have some stuff going on out there, out of this virus. And I think DG knows about this, and the team in the department, Mtembu. That particular matter is also being attended to. The social distancing of trains, particularly how train, we will see it. We're getting into that from tomorrow, DG. Tomorrow we're going to be running, testing. We're going to be testing tomorrow, Sunday, Monday, how train service will be running. But we're not going to the airport, forget. So I will be there myself with the MEC of Gauteng to see, are they observing what we are doing. But I'm confident with Gautrain. The bigger challenge you must know is the other, PRASA. And we have said, use this period, because we have opened up now to get essential workers at PRASA to do the work, fixing, refurbishing, doing the construction work that we need to do. As you know, before coronavirus, we're dealing with big corridors, Cape Town, Mabopane. We need to get those going in this period when there is a shutdown. But we can't just go, boom, open up PRASA that way. It can't happen like that. But we have said they must run testing also now, as informed by RSR, which is the regulator. They must run testing to ensure that when we go back online and we're running trains, there's no question, because everybody's worried. How are we going to survive in a train? What you see every day in the social media, cramming of people, congestion and all of that. How are we going to deal with that? And we're dealing with that issue in level 4. We're not waiting for level 3. So that the train management under PRASA is readying itself to come back to operation full force after this, and by ramping up testing and doing all of those particular things. And I think that's what we're doing. And as part of our rollout of the directives that the minister is giving today, it includes that as of next week, the testing, and you can see the cycle of testing. And then we have just given you the presentation, but we'll circulate to the media the context and the detailed, operational plan of the directives and the regulations as gazetted and so on. Thank you, Minister.
I thought I would just sit there, Minister Mbalula and Deputy Minister Makazi, and just use that mic. Unfortunately, our community radio stations can't pick up when we use that mic. Unfortunately, all of us must then come here. But we'll correct all these things with time. Now we are going back to get some... By the way, we appreciate the questions. We will also appreciate some comments as well. We are together in this, people of our country. I know that if we act together and we work together, we'll defeat this virus. Let's start with the online platform.
On the line, we have Tabo from Rainbow FM.
Tabo. Tabo, are you there? Tabo is not there. Can we get to the next caller?
The next caller is Mr. Johnson from Daily Sun.
Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson, can we hear you? Well, it looks like Mr. Johnson doesn't want to speak either. Who's the third one?
The third one is Ellen from Public Eye. Hello, Ellen.
Helen, can we hear you? Well, it doesn't look like your system is working as it should. Let's go to the WhatsApp system. At least there you write, you don't speak. Okay, Nangaf.
The first question is from Juliet Joseph from Kaya FM. And the question is, for pupils returning to classes in June, what are the regulations for scholar transport, especially those that have monthly or yearly contracts with drivers? Then there's also a follow-up question on that one to ask whether scholar transport will also be subjected to the 70% capacity when children eventually do go back to school. The next question is from Charlotte from EWN, and the question is, if a non-essential services citizen has a driver's license that has expired during the lockdown, will the forgiveness period be extended as it was under level 5? Similarly, if someone's car license has expired during the lockdown, will they also be forgiven for having an expired car and driver's license? Then there's a question from the same person that's asking, are emergency car repairs available for all citizens, or is it only for essential services workers? Please clarify. Then we have a question from Nazir from Glow TV, and the question is, are neighbors, parents, etc. allowed to take their children, spouses, etc., who are essential services staff to and from work? And in other words, is private transport allowed on a daily basis? The second question is, how do ministers and their teams move from province to province? Do they use private planes or road transport? Then we have a question from Matthew Savitz from Times Live. The question is, can relatives travel between houses for purposes of childcare or elderly care, etc.? For an example, if a child's parents are working as essential services, can a relative travel to assist in caring for their child, or can the child be taken to the relative's home? Then we have a question from also.
Yes,
it's the fifth question.
Okay.
Well, not the fifth question, but the fifth person.
Okay. I know you can count, but you can continue.
Yes, Minister, I assure you I can count.
I know you can count. Okay. Then let's hear the last question for now.
From Earl September from Sont Courant, the question is, can Minister Mbalula give clarity if during the 7-day period, the 7-day grace period, an individual with a license can go and fetch a loved one who does not have a license? Example of parents fetching children from visiting grandparents, either within the district or outside of the district or province. And also understanding that this will be a once-off arrangement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleague. Come here. Oh, DJ, thank you. DG, when you finish, you'll call either the minister or the deputy minister. At least I have a vacation now.
Thank you, Minister Mthembu. Let me start with the last question. It will be more easier. I think the grace period allowed for people to go back to work mustn't be seen as an opening of a floodgate for people to move and travel around. It's not intended for that. The regulations themselves provide separately for regulations on the movement of children. And I think those regulations have got to be observed separately. It has nothing to do with the window period that opens up for people to travel from where they have been during lockdown in level 5 to now where they have to go back to places of work. So from that point of view, this is a single way, one way. Is not, of, as Minister points out, it's not to go visit somebody and at the end of the 5 days, on the 7th, you then travel back and you go somewhere. You have to go only one way to where you have been locked in, and now we take it that perhaps Monday you need to be going to work and then you are traveling back to where you ought to be and out of the level 5 lockdown. So the regulations pertaining to the movement of children are quite clear. And children, you've got to have a permit and have all what is required for you to be moving children around. So and this is not this. So if you are going to be found with children, really, children are not going to work. I think you are going to be arrested. It's as simple as it gets. The issue about how ministers move around, many ministers utilizes their own vehicles. Obviously, the expectation is that at the national level, ministers may move anywhere. There's no piece of the republic where they do not reach. But also depending on what the program is, if the Minister of Health, for instance, has to visit 3 hospitals and 3 quarantine sites in the same day, if needs be, the chartered flight will be utilized. But there are no, as I've indicated, scheduled flights that allow for people to book tickets and then to move from one area or one airport to the other. That's not there. Once more, the issue of expiry of licenses. I think at the beginning of lockdown, Minister Mbalula did issue a direction indicating that the licenses, your car discs, your actual driver's license, and other permits that are there, including permits for professional driving and all of those, should they expire during the lockdown period, they would be deemed to be valid until the lockdown ends. Now, we are where we are. We will, should the situation change in terms of the interpretation of validity, Minister Mbalula will issue further directions to highlight as to when the grace period that is known would kick in, within which when the full capacity of our centers are operational and our online platform is operational, then I think we would be in a position to direct that now the period of validity is in this regard. Obviously, they are chance takers, people who have had their licenses expired 3 years ago, long before lockdown, and the grace period of 21 days did pass and they did absolutely nothing about it. The dates will tell us. So certainly, if your grace period was 21 days before the date of lockdown, we deem your license to be valid. It's valid, certainly, because we understand that within the period of grace period, you would have been able to renew your license. However, the lockdown came and the centers were unavailable for you to renew. But if your license was long expired, long before we realized that it had nothing to do with lockdown, and in that instance, the law must take its course. And I think it's a case which Minister was misunderstood, of a person who was stopped on the highway in a roadblock and the license was long expired. It has nothing to do with lockdown. And if your license is 2 years on expired, don't say we shouldn't do anything to you. You are not supposed by law to have been driving on the road. Right? We should impound and arrest, indeed, Minister, and you were correct the first time. So I think that's the situation with licenses. A further direction will be issued once this issue, Minister has said, needs to be clarified better. Gets to be clarified because we will start with the metros. All the driver's license testing centers in the metros, all metros are known of our country. On the 1st of June, they will kick in and start operating. And then we will, as Minister said, we will be using the month of May to inspect all measures. The measures Minister spoke about, social distancing, provision of PPEs for both employees to members of the public, all of that. We will investigate, evaluate, and assess the state of readiness of all of our DLTCs in May, and we will reopen them. And those that are certainly not ready or do not have capacity to reopen will not be opened. And I think that with that, the consideration about what our direction should say on the period of validity of a license then becomes linked to the opening up of our DLTCs. In as far as the emergency vehicles and spares are concerned, the regulations of COCTA are quite clear. It says that for servicing of vehicles and related aspects, that is for people who have essential or who do essential work in this regard. That's our priority for now as we start. Perhaps it will be a priority for the next 4 weeks. We will review the situation. However, it says that for tow services and roadside assistance, if you get stuck on a highway, the assistance that is now available is available to all motorists, to everybody. So that portion, yes, it is. But what we do not want to see is that essential workers have a reason why they need to service their cars now. They are using them to go to work and to commute, and if their vehicles are becoming unroadworthy because the tires are worn out and so on, and they need to replace. If we now have to say everybody can, so we are flooding the system, and even essential workers are going to run short of parts and every other thing to get their vehicles functional for purposes of the work that we do. But the emergency roadside assistance, I think, is for everybody, as well as emergency spares are for everyone because they are open. The other issue was raised was scholar learner transport. 70%, yes, indeed, will apply. The other measures that are applicable to public transport, including social distancing as well as sanitization of surfaces and provision of masks, will have to apply to scholar learner transport when ultimately the Department of Basic Education tells us that they are ready to go back. We are working with them, and we have finalized the draft plans with them. Our own regulations, we have consulted them and have articulated in line with the broader regulations on disaster management, and we are convinced that we are on the right side in as far as that is concerned. Can neighbors, spouses, partners transport essential workers to work? Certainly no. That's not what these regulations are about. Essential workers have been working even during lockdown, and they have been transporting themselves. And those that have no means have been utilizing public transport. It's not the same as you are perhaps a disabled person who all the time, even before lockdown, you had reasonable assistance in terms of support of a person who transport you daily and so on, and you have to perform, perhaps you are a nurse and you needed to be taken to work on a daily basis to the hospital, and that person has been transporting you. That status quo will remain, and when you are applying for a permit, certainly your permit would have been authorized, including the permit of the reasonable assistant, because they are tied with you in terms of the performance of the work, and in that instance, both of you will have permits. But what the question presupposes is that you'll have a floodgate of people with permits and another one in a car with no permit, who's just azul, and others are going to park in town saying, I'm waiting for my wife to knock off, and so forth. So I think that is not what the regulations have intended to do, and that's not covered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG and Minister, Deputy Minister. Just to emphasize that regulations get to be reviewed from time to time based on the material conditions, or how practically on the ground are they feasible or not, and how do they prohibit? We said people must jog, but we see mass meetings. What is the problem? You now need a scientific approach to say, is the problem the time that you give to these people who are joggers anyway, or should you open for them to jog the whole day, or whatever that is the case? Or is it the question of squeezing of time and so on? But then it defeats the purpose, because if you are jogging en masse, that's exactly what we don't want. And that's exactly what we are being advised by those who advise us on this approach we should not do. Like when I came and I said 100% in the taxi, and the question "Kwaba mnyama ebusweni benkawu" to me was, how is that furthering our fight against coronavirus? Where is social distancing? We didn't have to wait for it to be tested. Indeed, we did not have an answer. And Minister Mthembu also called me. We didn't have an answer about that, because we're addressing the demands of the taxi people who wanted to shut down. But we now forgot that, look, we're in a coronavirus. We're fighting a virus, and that is invincible. So we had to retreat on that. So when you retreat on anything, it's not because you are fearful, or you look like you are indecisive, or whatever that is the case. Sometimes we learn by trial and error. It does happen. So there's nobody who has been made to be ready for this. And if somebody says, but how do you arrive at the decision of allowing people to smoke when this thing is a respiratory thing? It's not because you don't want the economics to flourish. You don't want people to drink alcohol so that 2 billion rand is, you get it out of that for the economy to flourish. We have already taken a supreme sacrifice. Already supreme. We said life first. We knew that we will suffer. Our economy will be battered. Will be battered heavily. Our people were already unemployed. Millions and millions of our people will find themselves in the streets. And that is why we are able to get money, borrow money, ensure that we strengthen our social security net, because people are not working. They are hungry. And that is it. So I'm just saying that in the transport business equally, where there are things like truck drivers have been complaining that they don't get food and so on, I can't say to you today that no, they will not get food. We'll examine that and pass a direction. Even in Parliament, I was in Parliament yesterday virtually, and it was raised, the issue of truck drivers who are not getting food on the road. And they are rendering, remember, a very important service, transporting food and everywhere else. I'm duty bound with Alec, my DG, and the Deputy Minister to go back and process that issue and advise the Command Council, chaired by the President. No, we have to take a detour on this one. We are requesting that food supplies on the road must be opened. We've got to look at that. It's not about being Tarzan. You know, Ufunubangu Beyonce in the period of peace. You know, you want to be good. No, we will not win this war alone. Government will not win. Will not win. There's no doubt about it. It's not about strength. We want to showcase. These things are done with the understanding. We know. We don't believe that people are complying because they are complying because they understand the dangers. They've understood the president. The president did not just wake up and concocted a coronavirus. He didn't. And South Africa had to respond. And we're even criticized how we responded. We are late. You know, you can imagine 57 million people thinking alike. That will be something else. South Africa has got opinion makers. People who think sometimes they are doctors when they are not. and all of that. All of a sudden, that's why we must listen to doctors, epidemiologists, virologists, whatever. People who have gone to school, even they mislead us, we don't know. But they are telling us that we must, we do that. It's not like it's comfortable, this thing. You go to a mask and all of this thing is for crooks and people who work at the hospitals to look after our lives. All of a sudden, crooks have got a good time. You don't see him, corona, mjana, and so on. Now, we've got that. Now, we're told by Zwelim Kize, now who are we to argue with him? And Bokarim, Dr. Karim, they advise us. And we follow the orders. And that's what we're implementing. Where we made mistakes, there's no intransigence and arrogance that government insists on this. Let's have an argument. If people who are who have gone to school are advising us that it's not right to unban cigarette, singobani thina mpaku just because yes siyalimala phela abantu cigarette is giving a lot into our economy, utywala kuyaselwa, and all of that, but we are told don't drink. You see, subshaya mfowethu uyeke for now, we sacrifice. So it's not like somebody because of our country he's got morals that supersede everything and decided to smuggle in the fight against alcohol and all of this. Not that. It's just that we have been advised. We don't want to go back to be called denialist. No, they don't want to believe it. Bafuna ukubona ngokubona. Amadela ngokubona. People who are hijacking projects in our country. Madela, we want to see. Up until somebody dies next to you or yourself, I'm not going to put on this thing. It's not possible. The whole world is up in arms and is standing still. And we've got the Coronavirus Council. We've got the cabinet. We have been led. We've got a society that is obedient. Our people have never been so obedient. And we can't encourage South Africans to take to the streets and undermine their own health. We can't. When people protest that they are hungry, we respond to the best of our ability. But we can't encourage them to protest in this time because it will undermine everything else. But equally, government, ourselves, we must listen. And that is what we've been doing, I think. And if we're not listening enough, probably we need ourselves to be examined. Because it is not a one-way traffic, that command council. Political parties have ceased to become political parties, have made a contribution. When EFF or DA calls me and say, Mbalula, but this thing is not right, I don't take it that it's opposition, point scoring. We are in this thing together. I don't see political party. I'm political party blind. And that is why even certain political parties, including the ANC, have said no colors on food parcels. No colors. Because this is not about point scoring and masks and then put on your emblem and masks and all. If you want to contribute, contribute. And our people have turned up big time, have turned up and are doing that on their own. They do it. And then they go to the townships, they go everywhere. They didn't ask government. They are doing it on every day and they contribute. And I've never seen such camaraderie in my life in South Africa and the world over like I've seen now, where people stand up to feed those who don't have out of their own pockets, not for cameras. Every day doing that. And we are a democracy. We are a constitutional state. We are taken to court from time to time. And we are called to order by our courts. The courts are not closed. And therefore, everybody has got a right to take us on some of these particular things. The DG have responded. Ministers travel. And ministers can go anywhere on essential. If I'm called to be in the Western Cape and it is absolutely necessary to leave Gauteng, I will leave. But since I've been here with Jackson, every day, he now masters sign language, and then he's been here. And then he knows left and right and so on, which is good. But we've never left. Those who leave, we understand why. We understand why Zweli Mkhize must be in Western Cape. I don't even ask him. But if he were to do that in a normal environment, definitely that will be abuse of resources. That will be abuse of resources. I understand why Peggy Cele must be somewhere at a given point in time, because we must ensure that the law is being complied with and all of that. But I can't just say to Alec as the DG, "Can't bambelela jet mfo," because I want to abuse state. I deserve to be expelled, dismissed thoroughly, without a disciplinary hearing, because I'm abusing state resources. I'm here in Gauteng. We are here on a daily basis. Gauteng is the epicenter. Kuyafiwa la. Kuyafiwa. Everybody has come from everywhere, is here. It is bad. This thing is going faster than the speed of a Gautrain train. As we do these regulations today and announce them, our people are saying, including on education, it's too fast. I'm happy to hear people say that. It's too fast. Don't open schools. I'm happy to hear people say that. It means they are with us. We are not alone. If we act alone and there are no voices that seek to guide us, it's because people see the danger. Government must listen, and government act according to what people feel themselves. Because sometimes we can go on and on our own and think that we're on the right track. Scholar transport, we are working with the Department of Education. It is 70%. It's going to be very difficult to maintain that 70% for school kids if we want to get them back to school. We've got a big challenge of public education in our country. We know. If we were high up there, every child will be having a laptop at home and studying. But we know certain kids can afford in the private schools. Our kids in the public schools, in their majority, can't. They don't even know how to open a computer. And we don't have to be reminded by coronavirus. Coronavirus find us on the way perfecting the system. The system is not perfect. It's not. They pass in their numbers. But at the end of the day, it's not yet Uhuru, because we have not arrived where we want to get to. So that every child will be at home now, studying and getting formation materials and all of that through internet or whatever that is the case. We're not yet there. And that is what is going to be a bigger challenge. So we are aligned ourselves in transport to say when the schools reopen, trains must run. And then we have opened up now for transport to run 70% up until 6 o'clock, and then the curfew kicks in. 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, the curfew kicks in, no public transport afterwards, but schools are not open. But we are aligned. It will apply to scholar transport. Even this scholar transport, coronavirus find us, this scholar transport is corrupted to the bone. Corrupted. People making sense at the expense of life of our children. That's what happens. So that scholar transport must be perfected. But over and above that, we've got to be stricter if schools were to open at level 3 going forward. Obviously, ministers will advise us on that particular point. I just want to pause there, Minister, and say that nothing is cast in stone. But we remain firm on those things that are very important for us to advance to ensure containment. The numbers are growing faster. They are growing exponentially, and they say these numbers are going to catch up with us around September. But the way they are coming very faster than the losing of another team I won't mention today. which could have won the league long time ago, but because of how it is losing, then it couldn't, make it easy. Now, these numbers are coming fast and furious, and they are making us to be worried. And we know that many people are affected. Artists, people who rely on singing, just singing, as their daily income. They would not be in a position to do that. Government cares. All these things will be addressed, but we know we work with our people. Our taxi industry is highly affected. And next week, we're going to be addressing how we're going to address the financial situation and support for the taxi industry. Minister Mthembu knows about that. Once NCC endorse our modalities, the principle has been agreed. We are going to support the taxi industry financially. We are, and I've briefed them, all of them, Minister Mthembu, ndibatshelile ndibaxelele bonke oTai Bosch yonke zongai. I've told them ukuthi government is going to support the taxi industry. And we've been working out the modalities of how it's going to pan out. And once that is done, I report to the president. And once the president and the coronavirus team support it and give it a stamp, then I will come back and announce that this is how and this is how much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Mbalula, DG Alec Mwemi. Siyabonga, sibonga kakhulu. Just to indicate, before we take the last set of questions, just to indicate to our people at home, abantu sebabulewe legciwane emhlabeni wonke jikelele. Sebathi ababe ngamakhulu amabili namashumi amathathu nane, 234,000 people who have died because of this COVID-19. And in the whole world, out of those 234, as a country, we have 103 as we speak, as a country. And as we know, those that are now infected in the country are 5,600 and something. Out of the over 3 million that are infected in the whole world, we are doing our bit in all sectors, in the transport sector, in the schooling sector, everywhere we are, so that we reduce infections in our country and we also reduce the number of people who will die. So we really appreciate this work that all of us, and again, it can't only be government, like the minister has said, it's work that all of us must do together. Because if we don't, if we don't work together to reduce the level of infections and equally the level of death that will arise from this COVID-19 infections. That's what we are here about, and that's why we are here almost every day, speaking to our people, saying what it is that we're doing, where we are getting advice. We appreciate the advice because we don't have better intelligence than all the 61 million people of our country. We do listen to the minister, deputy minister, and DG. Where we have we are men and women enough to say, here, we are able to reverse. And that is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of people who are genuine in working together with other South Africans to fight this pandemic. We are together with our president, led by our president, Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, in this fight. He is the leader. So we are not defying the president in any way, in anything that we are doing as cabinet. In fact, he's leading us in all announcements that we make, including on the tobacco, by the way. including on cigarette, is the president who has been leading all of us on this matter and continues to lead us on this matter that we cannot open cigarettes now. After we did consultations with our people, they said, "Nipambene." That's what our people said. But nipambene. And we said, "Yo, yangathi siphambene, nyan." Including the president. What yo? In cabinet. What yo? Abantu bakithi bathi cha, lento esifuna ukuyenza abayiboni kahle. Kuthena sivula ugwayi kube sinesifo esihlasela amaphaphu. Kodwa thina sivula ugwayi cha ngathi ingcondo zethu azisebenzi kahle. So we are quite happy with the camaraderie spirit that exists in South Africa for us to fight. Of course, there'll be those few individuals who will say all sorts of things, etc. But even when we sleep at night, we know that we are doing the best we can, but in consultation with our people. Having said that, we are now taking the last set of questions, colleagues, so that we have answered all what is in the minds of our journalists and probably what is in the minds of our people. Do we have anybody? Okay, the journalist, it looks like our WhatsApp system is working much better than the other system, so you can take advantage of the WhatsApp system. Nangaba.
Thank you, Minister. If the DG can just elaborate on the answer with regards to the question from the previous round with regards to the movement of children within, if a caregiver needs to go and look after a child because the mother or the guardian is an essential worker, just that element, not in between provinces but within a district. The first question in this round, Minister, is from Miriam Issa from Finweek. And the question is, some people send their cars in for repairs before the lockdown, and those cars are still there, and they won't be able to get them under level 4, as repairs have not been classified as essential. Could something be done to address this, because the cars have just been sitting there since the beginning of the lockdown? Then a related question on that one is from Nazir from Glow TV, who's asking, are vehicle testing stations allowed to open during level 4, under level 4?
Just a minute. Who's asking that question?
Nazir from Glow TV.
Was he listening? No, I'll just be interested because the minister spoke to that and the DG spoke to that at length. But be that as it may, I leave it to you whether you continue. The next one, I'm just asking for my own interest's sake.
Then there's a question from Miriam Manak, who's a freelance property writer. And the question is, we have heard that removal companies can't operate, but can people move on their own in terms of someone putting their stuff on their bakkie and move house? Is that allowed, since removal companies aren't allowed to operate? Then there's a question from Landi from Rapport, and the question is, will the road accident fund be operational under level 4? There's a question from Precious from the African Post, and the question is, some doctors who finish their internships are supposed to move between provinces so that they can start work where they've been placed. What has been done to assist them in moving, as we've been told that moving companies can't operate? The next question is from Lindy Sitole, and the question basically is that, understanding that the curfew ends at 8 p.m. and most essential workers would knock off at 7 p.m. and would still be in transit by 8 p.m., will there be provision for public transport, such as taxis, that carry essential workers to still be on the road after 8 p.m., since some people would need to travel between 7 and 8 p.m. to get home after work? Then there is a question.
Say number, Bande.
Oh, this is number 4.
Okay.
Yes. From More from Vukuzenzele. And the question is, it's also related to a question that's already been answered. With higher education campuses staggering their reopening, will students be allowed to travel to campuses and to places where they live outside of the period of between the 1st and the 7th of May in terms of the once-off allowance for traveling? Especially considering the fact that campuses will be opening between July and August. Then there's a question from...
Maybe let's just answer that question now so that we don't burden them. The Minister of Higher Education has not said when the institutions of higher education will open. So when they have made that decision, they will obviously be in touch with the Transport Department and with also the Command Council led by the President. Some of those questions will be answered then, not now, because they don't arise now. There's no opening of these institutions now. Next.
The last question is from Heidi Jokos from ENCA. What happens to aircraft licenses that will expire during this lockdown? The extension granted by SACA expires on the 26th of June 2020. Are flights only expected to resume much later in the year?
Thank you. How many questions do you still have remaining?
I don't have any. That was the last one, Minister.
That's good. That's perfect timing. Who starts? DJ Mwemi. Ngiyabona ukuthi uya delegate Minister serious.
Thank you, Honorable Minister Mthembu. The question by Heidi Jacobs of ENCA on the aircraft licenses that expires. Earlier we had issued a direction to that effect about our license and permits for aircraft and related in the same manner. The ships that are registered on the South African Ship Register, in the same manner, we had issued a similar direction to that effect. So the licenses for pilots, for everybody, remain valid. And it is for this reason that we had allowed pilots to do the mandatory ICAO specification times in relation to the time they need to spend within a flight simulator. We had provided for that, and they had been doing that so that they do not lose their international accreditation. And as far as aircraft is concerned, SACA had issued earlier an extension. Correctly, as she points out, it is expiring. They are waiting for our directions, which will be published and gazetted immediately. And in this case, they would then empower SACA to be able to issue a further extension until services run back to normality, in which case they can then be able to do a normal renewal. But till then, we will deem aircraft licenses to be valid. It is for this reason as well that one of the measures we're bringing within the directions that Minister will publish is a measure of allowing compulsory maintenance for aircraft. It's one thing extending the lifespan of a license, and it's the other looking at the physical verification of the safety and airworthiness of that aircraft. And to that extent, we are now allowing for that maintenance that is compulsory, the regular inspections around hydraulic systems, braking systems, avionics and control boards and all of that. We are looking at all of those from a safety point of view, and for the engines to be run, and we are allowing for aircraft mechanics to be able to do that work in level 4, so that the extension correspond well with the licensing in as far as that is concerned. The issue of the cars that have been submitted for servicing prior to lockdown, reality is that if you are not an essential worker, of course, if you are an essential worker, then your car that was submitted earlier is ahead of the queue and has to be dealt with first and be treated and need be churned out. For the rest of the cars that are belonging to non-essential workers, In truth, the question is if you are not in the sector that is allowed to be operating under level 4, exactly where are you going? This is the key thing, because the regulations are intended to encourage people to stay home. And so if indeed you need the vehicle as an essential worker to be finalized because you are using it for essential work purposes, you have to show the dealership your essential work permit, and they should be able to assist you in that case. So I think perhaps that will bring a bit of clarity in as far as that is concerned. The issue of removal companies and whether people can move on their own, certainly if you are to do a movement inter-provincially, you need the inter-provincial permit, and if you are doing it during this period, I guess it will be implied at law. In reasonability will suggest that this is implied, that if you are, chances are, can you imagine if you were to start you were scheduled to start a new job on the 1st of May, or at the beginning of May, with 1st of May being a public holiday. So certainly the next Monday you were to start a new job. Typically it means that you should have been allowed to have moved between your previous place of abode to a new one. And now with the services you may require not being present, if you were moving on your own to do this, or even some of the people who have been staying in Johannesburg working here, and they've been staying in a flat at Hillbrow, and their bed there was a terrible one, and they are now in Limpopo, and they want to come back during this period, and they have been gifted by their uncle a bed, and they want to come along with it to bring it to Hillbrow. I guess reasonability suggests that in that once-off, one-way movement, that could be accepted as a purpose of movement to where we need to go. The key issue we're concerned about, obviously, is that there couldn't be more than the loading capacity that is required in a vehicle. So even if it was a buggy and it is a double cab, the intention is to have no maximum of 2 people if it is a private vehicle, and if it is a public transport provider, the regulations pertaining to public transport will then kick in that regard. Same will apply to the doctors that needs to do the movement right now, and who need to move to the new place where they now have to do their practicals or otherwise. And I think that they should use the window then of 1 to 7 purposefully to achieve what they require. In as far as public transport after 8, all our regulations had been gathered trying to encourage as much as possible for buses, taxis, and chauffeur-driven services and all of that to operate within the duration, so that the curfew is quite effective. Minister did speak about arrangements of where some odd sectors that in level 4 are allowed to operate, such as mining and even some manufacturing. They run a 3-shift system, which the shift system doesn't correspond with the normal working hours that we see. And under those circumstances, if they are producing medical supplies and they are producing ventilators, they are producing food and other things that are required and are essential, those shifts are allowed to proceed and for them to function. And therefore, it will follow that the companies themselves have got to make specific arrangements. And it is for this reason that the minister had said, in that instance, charter services must be utilized for this purpose, and that shuttle services can also be utilized for this, for their own employees, and with the proviso, which the directions now indicate, that those vehicles must be easily identifiable, and that the police must be able to see that this is not a normal taxi, it's a hired taxi to do specific work, and such accreditation is what would need to be finalized in this regard. But certainly the intention is to try and limit as much, and that is why even with delivery events and delivery services such as Uber Eats and Mr. Delivery and related aspects, we are saying that they must finish at 7. In fact, they pick up the last meal at 7, and we take it that the areas and the radius within which they deliver meals is closer to the shop where they are expected to deliver to. And They then deliver to you. They still, within 30 minutes, they have a further 30 minutes to actually drive to their respective homes, or so on, so they do not compromise lockdown curfew. So that's the intent. And to every general rule, there are exceptions. The key issue is how do we account for those exceptions, and those exceptions are in what I've already outlined, where the specific companies that, or even if in this case, is a nurse, like you say, at a hospital who knocks off exactly at 7, and the time to reach home may not be the same, and may have to arrive at 8:10. Those exceptions can be noted, and public transport providing that must cater exactly for those exceptions. I think, Minister, I've answered. Oh, there's an issue of children who are supposed to move. I'm not really an expert on the movement of children. Social development is, and I'll be wary to answer to things that I'm not sure about exactly, but I can indicate that there is a specific permit that has got to be obtained in this regard. What has been relaxed and eased was the whole issue of the permit being obtained only after by the magistrate and all of that. The Inter-provincial had eased the measures to make sure that it is more easier by allowing that where the birth certificate of the child bears the name of the parents and the father, and is unabridged, and the parents, whichever one of the parent, has a corresponding ID that shows that the child belongs to them. For that purpose, they can move them on agreement between the two parents and the two parties in this regard. And I think that covers the question. The RAF. On the issue of the Road Accident Fund has kept a skeletal staff. Obviously, right now under level 4, it isn't one of the sectors mentioned in this, but because they are an entity of the state, they have been receiving claims, and they have not been necessarily processing some of the claims they have been receiving. It's a matter we will now review going forward and see to it that how far we can go. We, as everybody may be aware, the RAF is fighting a titanic battle for its survival in the courts, and in trying to get itself in a position where it can actually process the issue of claims much more faster. And it is for this reason that the matters are sub judice and are before the courts. But once the courts have decided on these matters, it will help us craft a quicker way forward in determining what do we do by next week or so. And I think that is the story of RAF. Thank you.
Yeah, campus. What about
The campuses, Minister Mtembu answered it.
Yeah. No, the last point is that I think Minister Mtembu answered the question about the campuses. But we wish to thank everybody for staying at home. We still required to be at home. And you must have good reasons why you are on the road at any given point in time. You either are you are rendering an essential service. So most of the time we must be indoors, and we must be at home and stay at home. And we want to thank everyone for being disciplined and adhering to the regulations. So we in transport, like we said, we will follow up on the regulations implementation and respond week in and week out, day to day, on the effectiveness and the challenges that we are dealing with on the ground in terms of these regulations. Thank you very much.
Sibonge kakhulu kubo bonke bebalalele kulomsakazo na ku television emakhaya. Njengoba sishile ecaleni silana ukuzama ukugwema ukuthi abantu bakithi babhuqwe ilegciwane, babulawe ilegciwane. Ingako sibeka yonke lemithetho eseyikhulunywe ungqongqoshe wezokuthutha. Sibonga kakhulu kuwonke ama television stations, ama radio stations, including community radio stations, ukuthatha lezi ndawo bazimikise emakhaya. Thank you and thank you once again. We will continue to keep South Africa informed of what's happening, particularly what it is that we're doing at government level to fight this virus. But what we know, as my colleague has said, is that we're not alone in this. We're together with the people of Mzansi. We can only beat this virus if we work together. We will continue saying this. We can only have less people being infected if we work together. We can only have less people dying from this virus if we work together in all our industries, whether they be in transport, in manufacturing, in whatever sector of the economy. Only if we work together. And as we are on the first day of level 4 of the lockdown, there are certain things that remain. One of those is what was said by the minister: social distancing, even in transport, even in taxis, even in buses, even in, what do you call it, train yaseGoli? Even in the Gautrain. So social distancing will continue to be what we practice everywhere we are. But the minister has also said we must continue. We have been able to do better than other countries, by the way, even though one death is one death too many. But we have been able to do better than other countries because we have stayed at home. So we must continue staying at home, except those, of course, who are allowed now to go to work, use our public transport and other forms of transport to go and do certain work that has now been allowed under level 4. But even those that go to work, even those that are able to go to get food, because that allowance is still there. We can still go and get food. We can still go to the pharmacy. We can still go to the bank. But as we do so observing social distancing throughout the length and breadth of our country. The minister and all of us have also said movement between provinces is prohibited. But there'll be a once-off opening, as the minister has said, between today and the 7th. Now, after is 7, ungafonela umthembu uthi wemthembu ngenza njani. Or ufonela uMbalula. Because there is nothing we can do at that time. The law will be saying you can't move between provinces. Except, of course, if you're staying in one province and working in another province where you need permission almost every day of commuting. Same if you are going to school in another province and you are staying in another province, you need to commute every day. There is a system of permitting that will allow that move. But generally, there'll be no allowance of movement between provinces. But most importantly, all of us, let's hold the fort. Let's work together. Let's stay at home. Let's ensure that all of South Africa is safe from this virus. Let's ensure that we save our people, we save South Africa from this virus by working together. Therefore, Minister, Deputy Minister, and DG, thank you very much, colleagues, for being part of this briefing, and also officials from the department that I can see that are in attendance here. But the most important people we would like to thank are those that you have thanked, Minister. Those who are working together with everyone in South Africa to beat this virus. They are part of Team South Africa. They are part of those people that all of us, when we have beaten this virus, because we will, that we can assure bonke labo Thomas abadawuthayo ukuthi le virus yona sizayinqoba. We will beat this virus just like we have beaten other things in this country. We are a resilient nation. We will definitely come tops even on this virus, only if we do all these things that we are expected to do. Stay at home, social distancing, not touch, not kiss, and wear our masks everywhere now in public places from today. And if you don't have a mask, put a scarf or any cloth that you can put that will protect you and us from something that will come from your mouth or anything that can come to your nose. So you close your nose and you close your mouth. So having said all these things, we would like to say, kubantu bakuthi, everybody at home, we know that we are almost always there, always getting into your homes, but for good reasons, for very good reasons. Thank you for listening to this broadcast. Thank you to all our broadcasters, all of them, to our radio stations, community radio stations. I think we are still on 65 community radio stations throughout the length and breadth of our country with every broadcast we make here. But also thank you to the SABC radio stations, thank you to the independent radio stations, and thank you to our sign language interpreters. Thank you to our digital platforms, your YouTube and many that continue to tell our people what's happening, what it is that we are saying. We are very appreciative. Again, we don't take your presence in this broadcast and your listening to this broadcast for granted. Also, to all our broadcasters and everybody else, the time that you allocate to us to do these important public announcements, we really appreciate that greatly. With those words, thank you and thank you. Let's keep home, let's stay at home and ensure that we save our country, we save South Africa. Thank you very much. Until we meet again. Siyabulela. Thank you, colleagues.